This is also a time of change for my family.
3 minutes ago, King Charles placed his signature beneath an order that could permanently alter the balance of trust inside the royal family. With one measured stroke of his pen, the king granted Sophie custody of Windsor Castle's sealed family documents, records hidden from almost everyone for years. But as the folder closed and the witnesses fell silent, one troubling truth became clear. Charles had not merely chosen a guardian, he had chosen a side. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles remained seated inside a private chamber at Windsor Castle, as the significance of his decision settled around him. The private order, a written instruction governing personal family matters rather than public law, gave Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, custody, review rights, and protective oversight of the sealed collection. Her title identifies her as Prince Edward's wife and a senior working member of the royal household. Yet this responsibility carried no ceremonial comfort. It placed her directly between the monarch and relatives who believed those records belonged to them. Sophie read her name twice. She pressed her fingertips against the page, then looked at Charles with quiet disbelief. "Are you completely certain?" she asked. The trusted confidant understood why the choice mattered. These papers contained private correspondence, handwritten family memoranda, personal instructions, and accounts connected to Queen Elizabeth II's final years. They were not constitutional records controlling government or succession. They held something more dangerous: private memories capable of reopening wounds that rank could never heal. Charles did not celebrate. He placed the pen beside the folder and turned toward the locked archive door. The king knew that granting access to the wrong person could transform personal grief into leverage. He also knew Sophie might pay heavily for accepting his trust. "Rank is inherited," he told her. "Trust is earned." She lowered her eyes, hearing both the honor and the warning inside those words. The restriction was absolute. Even senior relatives would now require Sophie's written approval before viewing the collection. She could not expose its contents freely, but she could refuse anyone whose request threatened family privacy. Charles had created a guardian, not an owner, and the difference mattered because every rejected request could feel like a personal accusation. Sophie then noticed one envelope lying outside the normal inventory. It carried Queen Elizabeth's private seal and a documented handwritten instruction: open only if unity within the family begins to collapse. The late monarch had left no explanation beside it. Charles would not say why he believed that moment had arrived. Footsteps suddenly stopped beyond the chamber. Camilla's voice cut through the silence as she demanded to know why access had changed without her approval. Sophie looked toward Charles, but he did not move. The order had taken less than a minute to sign, yet understanding why the trusted confidant had been chosen would mean confronting every fragile relationship surrounding the crown. Sophie had spent years standing close to the monarchy without fighting to occupy its brightest space. She had comforted the grieving, carried out difficult duties, and earned confidence through restraint rather than spectacle. Now that same discretion had placed her at the center of an extraordinary royal struggle. Charles trusted her with the family's most sensitive papers, but that trust threatened William's expectations, unsettled Camilla, and forced Edward to wonder what burden had just entered their home. Sophie's position had always been unusual. As a working royal, a family member who performs official duties on behalf of the monarch, she understood both the public pressure surrounding the crown and the private pain hidden behind it. She was Charles's sister-in-law, Edward's wife, and one of the few people who had built a close relationship with Queen Elizabeth through years of quiet service. The late monarch had watched her endure scrutiny without using family secrets to defend herself. Charles believed that distance made her valuable. The king needed someone close enough to understand the family, but removed from direct succession. The legal order determining who inherits the throne. Sophie had no personal path to the crown and no reason to reshape the records for her own advantage. Yet that neutrality did not protect her from resentment. It placed her directly in its path. Edward found Sophie sitting alone, with the signed order resting across her hands. She had not moved since leaving Charles's chamber. The Duke of Edinburgh, her husband's senior royal title, studied her face and immediately recognized fear beneath her silence. Being trusted by the king, Edward warned, may make you the target of everyone who now feels distrusted. Sophie looked down again. The honor suddenly felt like a burden entering their marriage. William reacted with greater control, but his unease was unmistakable. During a secure telephone conversation, the prince told Charles that he respected Sophie's judgment. Still, the future king feared that decisions involving his grandmother, his parents, and his family's history could now pass through a household outside his own. Charles answered firmly that protecting history mattered more than satisfying expectations. William ended the call politely, but he remained troubled. Camilla's concern cut deeper. A documented archive summary showed that the sealed collection contained correspondence from the earliest years of her marriage to Charles. The Queen Consort did not fear exclusion alone. She feared what Elizabeth might have privately recorded about her. When Camilla asked whether Sophie could read those letters, the king refused to answer. Anne offered no protest. Instead, Princess Anne sent Sophie a handwritten message through a trusted courier. Do not open anything alone. The Princess Royal's warning suggested that she already understood what waited behind the seals. Sophie read the message twice before showing Edward. In that moment, the trusted confidant understood the darker truth. Charles had not chosen her simply because she was dependable. The king had chosen her because an earlier incident proved that someone else could no longer be trusted. To understand his fear, Sophie would have to return to the night when a forbidden request turned private suspicion into irreversible action. The crisis did not begin with Charles's signature. It began 11 nights earlier, during a private family gathering at Windsor, when an archivist received an instruction that appeared routine but carried the wrong authorization. Someone wanted access to a sealed cabinet linked to Queen Elizabeth's final family arrangements. The cabinet remained closed, yet the attempt shattered the king's confidence. From that moment forward, Charles knew the documents were no longer protected by silence alone. Charles had created the sealed archive after his mother's death. An archive is a protected collection of historical records, but this one separated the late Queen's personal family papers from official documents connected to government and royal duties. That difference mattered. Official records could explain decisions made by the Crown, while Elizabeth's private letters could expose fears, judgments, and promises never intended for public use. Only the king and two senior custodians, trusted officials responsible for protecting valuable records, could change who entered. The family gathering had seemed harmless. Sophie remembered quiet conversations, familiar laughter, and relatives moving freely between rooms without the usual tension. Yet someone had used that relaxed atmosphere as cover. While the trusted confidant spoke with Edward elsewhere in Windsor, a senior household intermediary approached the archivist and delivered a private instruction. Cabinet 7 must be opened before midnight. The archivist felt immediate doubt. According to the written incident report later presented to Charles, the intermediary claimed Camilla required a family continuity memorandum. Such a memorandum is a private written record explaining how sensitive family responsibilities should pass from one reign to another. The request sounded convincing because it contained language known only to a narrow royal circle, but it lacked the monarch's personal cipher, a coded mark, proving that an instruction genuinely came from him. Charles read the report twice. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the paper, and asked the archivist who had delivered the command. The answer struck him like betrayal, because the intermediary worked close to the Queen Consort's household. The king did not raise his voice. His silence was worse. Someone had understood the archive system well enough to imitate authority, yet had failed to reproduce the one mark that could unlock it. Sophie felt her stomach tighten when Charles summoned her. She realized the request had been made during a gathering she attended, meaning her presence and the family's trust may have provided cover. The trusted confidant asked what Cabinet 7 contained. He answered with only one detail. An envelope marked for the moment, royal unity faced a serious internal threat. Charles questioned Camilla through a recorded private conversation, preserved for the household inquiry. She denied ordering the cabinet opened, but admitted asking whether Elizabeth had left a continuity memorandum concerning her position. The Queen Consort's answer did not calm him. It made the missing authorization more disturbing. Once the locked cabinet became the subject of accusation, polite distance could protect no one. Charles summoned Camilla and Sophie into a room without aids, knowing the next words spoken would either restore trust or destroy what remained of it. There were no aids in the room when Camilla faced Charles, Sophie, and the question neither of them could avoid. The king placed the rejected access request on a table between them, and asked why her household had sought a document he had never authorized anyone to see. Camilla's expression hardened. Sophie remained silent. Then one sentence changed the atmosphere completely. The Queen insisted she had a right to know what Elizabeth had written about her. Charles had chosen a small Windsor drawing room and deliberately excluded private secretaries, the senior aides who normally manage royal meetings and preserve formal procedure. He wanted no advisor speaking for them, and no official language softening the truth. This mattered because the dispute had moved beyond access to old papers. It had become a test of whether marital loyalty could outweigh a dead monarch's final instructions. Sophie sat opposite Camilla because her initial appeared in an earlier cataloging note connected to Cabinet 7. A cataloging note is a short archive entry explaining how a record should be stored, protected, or reviewed. The trusted confidant had never been told why Elizabeth included her. Now she wondered whether the late queen had predicted this exact confrontation. Camilla denied ordering anyone to break the seal. The queen consort admitted asking whether a family continuity memorandum existed, but insisted that curiosity was not a crime. She turned toward Charles and accused him of treating his own wife like a danger inside her home. The words struck hard. He loved her, yet the king also carried a duty to protect his mother's instructions from anyone she had not authorized. Charles pushed the rejected request across the table. He pointed to one phrase, "Protect the continuity of accepted family standing," and asked why it resembled private wording Elizabeth had used during her final year. Camilla hesitated. That pause changed everything. Sophie watched the monarch's face tighten as personal doubt became something colder. Camilla finally revealed her source through a recorded conversation made for the household inquiry. A former aide had told her that Elizabeth left conditions restricting how private family history could be used during Charles's reign. The Queen Consort insisted she wanted to know whether those conditions could damage her position. She did not want the papers exposed. She wanted protection from whatever judgment they contained. Sophie reached for the request and noticed a handwritten notation in the margin. Refer unresolved family disputes to S. Her breath caught. The trusted confidant realized the letter might identify her as Elizabeth's chosen neutral custodian, a guardian expected to protect the records without serving either side. Camilla rose and pushed her chair back sharply. She warned Sophie that accepting control would place her between a king, a queen, and the next sovereign. Charles said nothing, but his silence confirmed the danger. Sophie had heard the warning. Yet the authority behind the king's decision was stronger and far more personal than anyone in that room understood. The answer waited inside a memorandum Elizabeth had prepared before her final days. Charles's order appeared to be an act of royal power, but its deepest authority came from a voice that could no longer defend itself. Hidden inside the archive inventory was a memorandum prepared during Queen Elizabeth's final year, a safeguard against family papers becoming weapons in a future struggle. She had not selected the loudest defender or the highest-ranking heir. Instead, she had identified the person she believed could read painful truths without exploiting them. Sophie. Anne joined Charles after the confrontation and placed a verified copy of the late Queen's instruction before him. An archive inventory is the official list showing which records exist and where they belong, while a memorandum is a written instruction preserving decisions for future use. Elizabeth's note concerned stewardship, privacy, and mediation, protecting the papers, controlling access, and settling disputes without granting anyone control over the monarchy. Charles began reading with the discipline expected of a sovereign. Then he reached the sentence describing Sophie as steady under pressure, and the king's composure broke. His mother had written that strength inside a divided family did not always belong to the person who spoke first or held the highest rank. Sometimes it belonged to the one who could hear a painful truth and refused to turn it into a weapon. Anne watched her brother fold the copy slowly. The Princess Royal understood that he was no longer reading only as monarch. He was reading as a grieving son, hearing Elizabeth guide him from beyond her reign. According to Anne's recorded statement for the Archive Review, their mother had wanted a guardian without a direct claim to the throne. Such distance mattered because an heir might be accused of protecting personal interests, while an outsider might never understand the family's wounds. Sophie listened as Charles explained why Elizabeth had selected her. The trusted confidant felt no triumph. She felt trapped by the loneliness described in the memorandum. "What if protecting these papers makes reconciliation harder?" she asked. The king admitted that it might. Yet allowing frightened relatives to search the records freely could destroy trust completely. Anne then revealed, through her documented account, why the late Queen had personally added Sophie's initial. Years earlier, Elizabeth had watched her quietly resolve a painful disagreement between two relatives. She had carried messages between them, refused to leak either side's anger, and ended the dispute without demanding credit. The Princess Royal said that moment convinced their mother that discretion could hold a family together when authority could not. Sophie's power still had firm limits. She could protect and review the collection, but any disclosure affecting several relatives required consultation with Charles, Anne, and William. The future king therefore remained part of every major decision. William had not been pushed aside. Yet someone told him exactly that. A distorted message reached William, claiming Sophie now controlled everything Elizabeth had left behind. As the prince demanded an immediate explanation, the documents remained protected. But the truth about their custody was already racing through the palace, faster than Charles could contain it. By the time Sophie left the archive corridor, the order had already been reduced to a dangerous palace whisper. Charles had handed her control of the family's secrets. Doors closed. Calls were made. Old suspicions returned with new force. Sophie had expected responsibility, but she had not expected isolation. Then William telephoned, not to congratulate her, but to ask whether she could now decide what he was permitted to learn about his grandmother, his parents, and his own future. Sophie heard the accusation beneath his careful words. She explained that every pending request to view the sealed collection had been suspended until she completed a full inventory with the Windsor archivists. An inventory is a detailed record confirming what each archive contains and whether anything has been moved, opened, or damaged. The pause mattered because Charles could not protect the family if nobody knew whether the collection remained untouched. William listened, but his concern did not fade. The prince had received an official household notice confirming that Sophie's authority covered private family custody only. She had gained no constitutional power, no control over state documents, no ownership of royal property, and no influence over the succession, the legal order deciding who inherits the crown. Yet the future king cared less about titles than consequences. William told Sophie that Catherine and their children must never discover intimate family history through a public leak. The Princess of Wales had already endured years of pressure surrounding the monarchy, and selective disclosures could drag Catherine into disputes she had never created. He feared that one private letter involving Diana or Charles might be released without context, forcing his family to defend pain that should have remained personal. Sophie promised that would never happen under her protection. Still, the trusted confidant heard distance in his voice. When the call ended, she sat beside the unopened archive case and admitted to Edward that she feared losing relationships built over decades. Her husband reminded her that refusing the role would not remove the danger. It would simply leave the documents exposed to someone less careful. A preliminary inventory then delivered the first real shock. One sealed file no longer rested in its recorded position. The seal remained intact, meaning nobody had opened it, but an archivist's documented review confirmed that someone had lifted the file and examined its outer notation before Charles signed the order. Sophie read the notation without breaking the seal. The brothers, private promise following Diana's death. The words linked the file directly to William and Harry. Diana had remained the deepest emotional wound between her sons, while Harry's distance had made every reference to their shared grief dangerously sensitive. William reacted immediately when Sophie informed him through a recorded secure call. He believed the file concerned a promise made to him and Harry after Diana died. The prince asked her to open it. Sophie refused, not from power, but principle. She would not touch the seal until they spoke face to face. The next decision would not be made through an aide or royal order. It would be made by two relatives alone, with trust, or permanent division, between them. Sophie entered the room carrying no file, no advisors, and no prepared defense. William was waiting beside the window, tense from hours of speculation about what the sealed papers might contain. She placed the archive key on the table between them and told him she would not use his family's pain to prove her authority. The gesture disarmed him. For the first time since Charles signed the order, control was replaced by something far more difficult: trust. Sophie had requested the private meeting at Windsor because another formal exchange would only deepen suspicion. No courtiers, official attendants who normally assist senior royals, stood between them. The trusted confidant explained that she could protect the archive and approve routine inspections, but she could not release sensitive records alone. Every important decision would be documented, creating a written account showing who requested access and why it was granted or refused. William listened without interrupting. The prince finally admitted that his anger came from fear, not distrust of Sophie's character. He had spent years protecting memories of Diana from becoming public property. Now a sealed reference to the brothers threatened to reopen the fragile relationship between her sons. The future king feared that one letter could turn grief into another argument between him and Harry. Sophie told William she had never wanted power over his history. She had accepted the role because refusing it would leave Elizabeth's safeguard unprotected at the worst possible moment. The late queen had created those limits to stop private pain from becoming leverage. If the trusted confidant stepped away simply to avoid criticism, someone less careful might eventually take her place. Sophie then admitted something William had not expected. She was frightened. She feared failing Charles, disappointing Elizabeth's memory, and losing relatives who might mistake restraint for judgment. The prince looked at the key, then closed his hand around it. For one heavy moment, the authority Charles had given her rested with him. William returned the key. He told Sophie that responsibility should remain with the person his grandmother had trusted. The future king did not surrender his right to protect Diana's memory. Instead, he chose to believe that the archive could protect both him and Harry without choosing between them. Together, They inspected only the documented outer registry entry. A registry entry is a short official description identifying a record without exposing its private contents. The note contained no accusation and no hidden attack. It simply directed that neither son's grief, correspondence, nor promises following Diana's death could be disclosed unless both brothers were consulted. Sadie. William finally understood. The archive was not a weapon aimed at him. It was a barrier against exploitation, built by Elizabeth and entrusted to Sophie. Charles now had the future king's support to explain the order. Yet before the king could speak, a newspaper published its first headline: Sophie takes control of Windsor's secrets. Private trust had begun healing the fracture, but outside the castle, millions were about to judge a distorted version of the truth. At dawn, commuters across Britain encountered the same startling image: Sophie leaving Windsor beneath a headline declaring, "The Keeper of the Royal Secrets." Broadcasters questioned whether Charles had bypassed William, while commentators portrayed Camilla's exclusion as a calculated humiliation. But outside the castle gates, the public response was more complicated. Some saw intrigue. Others saw a weary king choosing the one royal whose influence had grown without noise, scandal, or ambition. Charles responded through a carefully written palace statement, confirming that Sophie had become custodian of a private family archive. A custodian is a guardian responsible for protecting records, not an owner free to use them. The statement also stressed that the order carried no constitutional authority, meaning it gave her no power over government, succession, royal property, or the official duties of the crown. Yet those clear limits struggled against a far more dramatic headline. Commentators divided almost immediately. Some argued that Charles was centralizing trust around one carefully chosen relative. Others described the decision as overdue recognition of Sophie's years of discreet service. William's absence from the first announcement fed suspicion that the king had ignored his heir. Camilla's restricted access encouraged an even darker theory, that the queen consort had been publicly punished without being allowed to defend herself. Sophie watched the coverage beside Edward, as one broadcaster suggested she had quietly sought greater influence. The trusted confidant's expression changed. She had accepted the burden because Elizabeth's safeguards needed protection. Yet strangers now treated her restraint as hidden ambition. Edward switched off the television and told her that silence would be misunderstood before it was respected. His words comforted her, but they could not erase the damage already spreading. Camilla faced a harsher version of the story. The queen consort unfolded a newspaper whose front page declared, "Camilla locked out." She read the article, folded it slowly, and placed it aside. A public challenge to Sophie might defend her pride, but it would deepen the crisis she claimed she wanted resolved. For once, Camilla chose silence, not because she felt defeated, but because Charles had made the cost of further conflict impossible to ignore. Public feeling shifted outside Windsor's Henry-side Gate, a major entrance named after the Tudor king, whose image still dominates the castle's history. A small crowd gathered as cameras waited for Sophie's departure. One woman raised a handwritten sign above the others: "Trust is service." The trusted confidant noticed it, and her car slowed for a brief moment. William then broke his silence through a documented public statement. The prince confirmed his support for strong protections around private family records, and declared that the arrangement respected both history and living relatives. His intervention destroyed the claim that Sophie's appointment was meant to weaken the heir. Charles now had public space to act. The headlines had called it a battle for secrets, but the king's final family gathering would reveal that he had been fighting to prevent a battle altogether. The final meeting did not end with victory for Sophie, defeat for Camilla, or surrender from William. It ended with Charles standing before his family and admitting that the monarchy could not survive if private pain became a source of leverage. He had signed the order because sealed history required a guardian, not an owner. Sophie's appointment was therefore not a reward for loyalty or a punishment for doubt. It was a boundary drawn around the family's most vulnerable truths. Charles gathered Sophie, Edward, Camilla, William, and Anne at Windsor for one final conversation. The archive existed to preserve personal history and protect living relatives, not to decide royal status or constitutional power. The lawful authority connected to the crown and government. The king made the distinction clear because private correspondence could shape family relationships, but it could not rewrite succession, ownership, or public duty. Charles then confirmed a permanent review structure. Sophie would remain chief custodian, meaning she would guard the collection and manage access. Anne and William would join the monarch in oversight whenever a document affected several relatives. This safeguard protected the trusted confidant from carrying every decision alone while preventing any one person from controlling the family's past. Camilla finally addressed the room through a recorded statement preserved with the archive review. The Queen Consort admitted that uncertainty about Elizabeth's private judgment had driven her search for answers. She did not apologize for wanting clarity, but she acknowledged that the attempted access crossed a necessary boundary. Her fear had allowed curiosity to become pressure, and that pressure had nearly destroyed the trust she wanted to protect. Sophie answered with equal honesty. She would accept the position only if guardianship never became personal authority. The trusted confidant wanted no power to punish, embarrass, or silence anyone. Edward took her hand as Charles agreed. In that quiet moment, her isolation ended. The king had given her responsibility, but the family would now share its weight. Anne brought forward the sealed crisis envelope, and William confirmed that every safeguard had been followed. The Princess Royal watched as Sophie opened it under the agreed rules. Elizabeth had left no accusation, scandal, or final attack. Her documented instruction carried one simple warning: private records must never be used to divide those she left behind. Charles read the opening lines, then stopped. The monarch closed the envelope without sharing its intimate contents. That restraint became the meeting's defining act. William supported Sophie. Camilla accepted the restriction. Anne endorsed the arrangement, while Edward remained beside his wife. Charles locked the archive, and Windsor's division finally ended. The order had placed the monarchy's private history beyond rivalry, proving that the crown's greatest strength was not possession, but the wisdom to leave certain wounds sealed. Trust had not erased the family's pain. It had taught them how to protect one another from it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.